Hey everybody, welcome back to AP Biology with Mr. Menike. I'm here today to discuss our final kind of cell communication, and that is the endocrine system. This is also pretty much the last system we're going to talk about in depth before your AP exam. The endocrine system is going to encompass a little bit of the reproductive system for the human body as well. So if you're following along at home, this information is found on page 7 of your human body systems packet, and I'm going to discuss with you the parts of the endocrine system, how the endocrine system works, the purpose of the endocrine system, and we'll highlight a few of the important organs and hormones found in the endocrine system. So you see the three major topic words that we have at the top of the screen here that correspond to the topic words on your page 7 of the packet. The endocrine system itself. The endocrine system is a regulatory system, very much like the nervous system. In fact, it has some common parts with the nervous system. The brain is the major organ that regulates and integrates the endocrine system just as it does with the nervous system. Specifically, there are a few glands within the brain that are very important for regulation and integration. The endocrine system, however, doesn't use the electrochemical action potentials or neurotransmitters with synapses the way the nervous system does. The endocrine system is a system of hormones and glands that is a slower system of regulation. Nervous system, very quick. Endocrine system, slower. And so your growth, your metabolism, reproduction, maturity, and aging are good examples of what the endocrine system regulates. It does this through a series of feedback loops, which is a way that the hormones not only regulate and talk to the target cells that they need to maintain homeostasis in, but also through regulating how the brain is processing the speed of your metabolism. You have to control the organs that control the endocrine system, and you do that through feedback. And of course, homeostasis is maintaining a internal balance for temperature and for hormone levels, for heart rate, for digestive rate, excretory rate, respiratory rate, all those important functions that keep your metabolism up and running. At the bottom of the page here, we can actually see a stylized picture of the endocrine system, and the reason why the endocrine system is a long-distance signaling model for the human body. And remember, if the immune system was a handshake between cells and the nervous system was tossing keys from one cell to the other across a synapse, like a short toss, then the endocrine system is a long toss. This is like the quarterback throwing to the wide receiver downfield. This is a long distance sort of regulation. The secreting cell over here on the left side is usually what we would call our glandular cells or gland cells. And so a gland would be a region where many cells secrete or release hormones into the bloodstream. Endocrine means that you're releasing hormones into an internal series of tubes, like the bloodstream. Exocrine is kind of the opposite of endocrine. Exocrine is when you release some kind of chemical into a tube that opens to the outside of the body. Salivary glands are exocrine glands, not endocrine. Your tear, lacrimal glands are exocrine glands. Your sweat glands are exocrine because they release to the outside of the body. You don't release your hormones outside of your bloodstream. They stay inside. Endo means in. So here we see these little green hormones here in this picture are being secreted. The word secrete basically means to release. And so we're releasing the hormones into the bloodstream, where it travels over a long distance and finally diffuses out of the bloodstream and enters the intercellular space. The space around the cells is filled with fluid, intercellular fluid. Remember, a dry cell is a dead cell. Well, all of these cells have to be surrounded by fluids in order for this to work. So this target cell has a receptor on it in order to capture that hormone. The shape of the hormone has to match the shape of the receptor. If they don't match, it's not a target cell, and then there's no response. The metabolism won't change or won't be regulated by that particular hormone. So this is a system of specificity. By specificity, I mean that the shape of the hormone has to match the shape of the receptor. And so round matches round. And if this, well, let's do that in a color that really makes sense. If this little hormone here matches this shape, then that means this has to be the target cell for hormone A. This is a target cell for hormone A also, but interestingly enough, it's also a target for hormone B, because hormone B matches the receptor on the other side of the cell. So some cells can be targeted by multiple hormones to do multiple functions. That makes sense. This is how your body helps to increase its rate of metabolic function and be more optimal. Here we have hormone B and receptor B are all working just great. And then poor hormone A, well, that's left out of the party because it's not shaped properly. And again, this is that specificity that we've been talking about. Specific hormones match the shape of specific receptors. It's the same thing with the endocrine system as it is for the nervous system and the neurotransmitters matching their receptors, and the immune system with interleukins matching their receptors. All of this has to make sense. The right key has to fit in the right keyhole. Page 7 has a really nice picture of all the different glands that are found within the human body for the endocrine system. And if you notice, they're not connected the way the respiratory system or the digestive system or the excretory system are connected by a series of tubes. That's not the case with the endocrine system. The endocrine system is connected by your bloodstream. And so the bloodstream has been left out of this picture. There's no circulatory system being shown in this picture. Use this picture. You can hit pause if you'd like to fill in the name of the glands on your chart to make sure that you've got that right, that match the glands that are in your picture, as well as their function. The functions are defined here for you. You can always pause this page to do that. You can also pause this page to do that for this particular set of not only the name of the gland, but also the hormones that are being produced. You'll notice that in this particular picture, the most influential of all of the glands in the body is the pituitary gland, and to be honest with you, the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland is sometimes known as, let's try this. Pituitary gland is sometimes known as the master gland, and the master gland is the gland that controls pretty much all of the other glands in the body. The only thing that controls the pituitary gland is the hypothalamus, and they sit pretty much right next to each other, right behind the nose and the eyes while sitting in the brain there. These, especially the hypothalamus, contains some special neurons that are called neurosecretory neurons. They not only make action potentials, but they release hormones that tells the pituitary gland to release other hormones into the bloodstream to regulate all the other glands you see listed on this page. All of those other glands on this page can also use their hormones to regulate the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus so that those glands don't overstimulate all of the other glands in the body. This is a way of feedback to protect and regulate your body. If you think about the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus as sort of like a thermostat in your house, when you set the thermostat for 65 degrees, when the house warms up to 65 degrees, the thermostat senses that temperature and turns itself off so that the heat doesn't continue to pump out of your vents or through your radiator. That heat acts as a way of turning off the thermostat because it's a feedback mechanism. The same thing happens in your body, except instead of heat, we're talking about hormones, chemicals, little chemicals that circulate through your bloodstream, turning on and off the pituitary and hypothalamus to regulate and either turn up the heat or turn down the heat, to turn up the hormones or turn down the hormones. So let's start with this example, and I'm going to switch my computer into tablet mode so that way I can draw on this more accurately. So my picture is going to disappear for a second. What you're looking at is a baby. And this is a fetus sitting here. This is the fetus, right? And baby is sitting in the uterus. The uterus is also known as the womb. Down here, this area, that's called the cervix. If you remember, we talked a lot about this year HPV, which causes cervical cancer. Well, there's the cervix. The cervix is the bottom of the uterus. This is a woman's body. Okay, this is her spine. Right, so she's laying down. Her head would be off to the left. Her legs are over here. This is a leg. And then this is the birth canal. Okay, or the vagina. And the baby is about to be born. And so when a woman is about to give birth, she goes into what is called labor. And so labor is a hormonal response. Labor is basically pushing out the baby. Now, what happens when a baby is about to be born is complicated. The baby is sitting in a fluid-filled sac in here called the amniotic sac. The amniotic sac is filled with amniotic fluid. And when the water breaks, all of that fluid flows out of the cervix and out of the vagina, and therefore the baby is ready to be born. And so what happens at that point is the baby starts pushing. Its head moves down, because it was originally floating in fluid, pushes, assuming the baby is in the correct position, on the cervix. So we're going to start here when the baby's head pushes against the cervix. When the baby's head pushes against the cervix is muscle. It's a very strong ring of muscle. It's sort of like a sphincter. A sphincter would be like your lips are sphincters, for example. The anus is a sphincter. Though the cervix is kind of like that as well. Well, muscles have nerves, and those nerves send impulses to the brain, and specifically, it goes to the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland secretes a hormone out of the posterior part of the pituitary called oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone that's a protein hormone. Notice it ends in IN, and its job is to travel through the bloodstream, go to the uterus, and cause the uterus to contract. That contraction is called labor. When the contractions are far apart, that means baby is not going to be born right now, because this cervix has to dilate. And when a dilating cervix opens, that means the baby's head is pushing through the cervix. Well, guess what? One push is not enough. So when the baby pushes on the cervix, that causes the baby's head to push against more nerve endings. which tell the brain's pituitary to release more oxytocin, which cause more oxytocin to travel through the bloodstream, which causes another contraction. As the contractions get closer and closer together in time, 2 minutes apart, 1 minute apart, etc., that tells you baby is on the way, because the cervix has to dilate 10 centimeters. 10 centimeters is something like 4.5 inches or so. That has to open that much in order to get baby's head and shoulders through. This is an example of a feedback loop. And this particular kind of feedback is called positive feedback, because this causes an increase in stimulus. This kind of positive feedback is not homeostasis. There is nothing stable about pushing a baby out of your vagina. This is a very difficult process, and an increase in the baby pushing causes an increase in the uterus to contract, which causes the baby to push on the cervix, the uterus to contract, the baby pushes on the cervix, the uterus contracts, and this continues, and it could go on for 36 hours until finally baby is out. That's when positive feedback is over. This positive feedback loop continues to augment the signal. When you let's try that again. I'm out of my mind here with this. Let's try that again. Augment. I don't think I spelled that right. The signal of hormones and their response, that is positive feedback. There are not many examples of positive feedback in the human body that lead to this level of non-homeostasis for the human body. The other example that's a little bit less drastic and dramatic is nursing, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So here's oxytocin. Oxytocin is sometimes known as the love hormone, because this hormone, it plays a part in your brain chemistry and how you respond to others and your attachment to others. High levels of oxytocin are measured in people who have that initial feeling of being in love with somebody. So here we have the pituitary gland releasing oxytocin, and that promotes or positively stimulates the uterus to contract. The fetus at the same time is releasing some hormones that also promote the uterus to contract. And so all of this helps positively stay in this loop of feedback. The placenta, which is the organ that helps the baby diffuse nutrients across the mother's bloodstream, also releases some estrogen that helps to increase oxytocin and increase uterine contractions. These negative feedbacks or inhibitions would slow down or stop contractions if these other hormones are in place. The anti-labor hormone is called progesterone. Seem to be having trouble today with going backwards, so let's try that again. There we go, progesterone. Progesterone is the hormone of pregnancy. Okay? This is the pregnancy hormone. This hormone is very high because during pregnancy, because what it does is it keeps the uterine lining in place to help the baby stay in the womb. Oxytocin is the opposite of the pregnancy hormone. Oxytocin is the labor hormone. It helps to push the baby out. Progesterone helps to keep the baby in. All right, let's look at lactation. Lactation is the process of producing milk. Here we have a baby who is suckling on the mother, and the mother senses this through receptors in her skin. So this stimulates nerves in the breasts, and this impulse is sent directly to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, again, is the boss of the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus produces a hormone that stimulates the pituitary, which then releases oxytocin. Instead of pushing on the uterus now, oxytocin actually causes contraction of the muscles that squeeze out milk in the breast tissue so that the baby can drink. The more the baby feeds, the more milk the mother makes. The more milk the mother makes, the more food there is for the baby to have. And so this becomes a very important positive feedback loop. Now, there's another hormone that works here that's released by the other side of the pituitary gland called the anterior pituitary, the front part of the pituitary. And that hormone is called prolactin. Lactin means to lactate. And so this hormone comes out of that side of the pituitary and stimulates the milk-producing cells so that they actually produce lactose. So you actually have two hormones working in concert here. The more the baby suckles, the more milk the mother makes, and the more oxytocin is released to squeeze the milk out of the breast tissue into the baby's mouth. This again is an example of positive feedback. This is a very hard thing to break. Some women who are lactating, who are nursing their babies, if they just hear the sound of a baby crying, that's enough for them to just lactate and make milk on demand because it's such a powerful biological process. Oxytocin is a very powerful hormone that works in the human body. Okay. The other kind of feedback loop is called the negative feedback loop. Negative feedback loops help to maintain homeostasis. This is sort of like a thermostat in your house. And so the example that I'm giving here is the thyroid gland in your neck. So we have a thyroid gland here on the left side. The thyroid system is regulated by the hypothalamus and also the pituitary gland, which are located in your brain. So what happens here in this particular case is the hypothalamus releases a hormone called thyroid releasing hormone, or TRH, thyrotropin hormone. That stimulates the pituitary gland, wakes it up, releases it directly through nerve cells. The pituitary gland then releases into the bloodstream thyroid stimulating hormone. That stimulates the thyroid. This is positive feedback in this particular case. So, in this picture, this is positive, this is positive. The thyroid gland then releases a few different hormones. The hormones that it releases are called thyroxine hormones that have a lot of iodine associated with them. Some of them are called triiodothyronine, and these hormones released by the thyroid gland is a positive feedback that helps you grow, that helps you develop, that helps you maintain your homeostasis. And so in this example, this is positive feedback also. But the thyroid hormones also send feedback to the brain that says, stop releasing thyrotropin releasing hormone and thyroid stimulating hormone. This is the negative part of the feedback loop. This is the body's way of saying, stop stimulating the thyroid. And so what happens is, if we look on the right side, the hypothalamus releases thyroid releasing hormone, which stimulates the anterior pituitary, which then causes a release of thyroid stimulating hormone, which stimulates your thyroid gland, which then targets your cells for growth and metabolism. Everything that I just highlighted in yellow is a positive feedback example. Okay, this is positive, stimulates. So this is positive, this is positive, this is positive. However, if you notice, thyroid stimulating hormone, when it's released, also tells the thyroid gland, tells the hypothalamus, and it tells the thyroid gland, well, we don't quite need so much of this hormone, and so that's negative feedback. This is an inhibitory. Hold on a second. This is an inhibitory loop, a negative feedback loop. And so this particular loop in pink is telling us, slow down. Don't go so fast. Don't release so many hormones all at once. The thyroid releasing hormone stimulates the thyroid stimulating hormone, which stimulates the thyroid hormones thyroxine, and then those hormones go back and become negative hormones. So they have a dual purpose. This is a negative feedback loop. This is the way your regulatory system doesn't overstimulate or understimulate your metabolism. The problems that could occur because of this, if this system were to go out of control, would be called hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. And so in these cases, people who have either an overstimulated or understimulated thyroid gland would have to take medication in order to regulate their metabolism. Otherwise, it's like having a house with no thermostat. You can't control the temperature. And so if you notice in the case of hypothyroidism, hypo means not enough or less than, just like hypotonic and hypertonic. So this is less thyroid stimulating hormone or less thyroxine being produced. In other words, you're not making enough thyroid hormones. So you're tired, you have weight gain, you're always cold, your hair and skin are dry, you might have a heavy menstrual period, slowed thinking, being constipated. So these are examples of slowed metabolism. And so in this case, everything's just working much slower. The opposite of that, of course, is hyperthyroidism. In hyperthyroidism, if you notice, it's the opposite. You're irritable, you have heart palpitations, you're feeling hot all the time, you're very thin because there's a lot of weight loss, you're exhausted because you're just using your metabolism way too fast. There's no way to slow that down. You're burning through all of your glucose reserves and your fat reserves very quickly. You're doing cellular respiration and making tons of ATP and then using it really quickly, and now you're tapped out. Frequent bowel movements, lighter menstrual periods, and so in this case, much quicker metabolism. Sometimes this is called Graves' disease. And sometimes if that gets really big, the thyroid here in your neck, so again, your thyroid gland, it could also lead to what's called a goiter. And a goiter is just like a really huge thyroid. And that has to get under control by taking some medications. So that concludes the first part of the endocrine system. We're going to pick it up with part 2, where we're going to examine a few more glands in the endocrine system, as well as look at the reproductive system as well. So that concludes part 1 of the endocrine system, feedback loops, positive and negative feedback, and the specificity of hormones and their usage of the bloodstream in order to travel long distances to regulate metabolism.